The snow bit into her skin like 1,000 frozen teeth, each flake a reminder that she was dying alone. Kira pressed her face deeper into the hollow of the ancient oak, her breath coming in ragged puffs that crystallized before they could warm her lips. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, or was it 4? Time blurred when you were left to die like unwanted prey. Her fingers, blue and stiff, clutched at the silver pendant hanging from her neck, the one thing they hadn't stripped from her before they dragged her to the edge of Shadowmere territory and spoke those final damning words, "You are no longer one of us." The memory sliced through her like the wind cutting through the trees above. Alpha Marcus, the man who had raised her, stood with his back turned while the Pack Council pronounced her exile. Her own brother, Dane, couldn't even meet her eyes, and her best friend, Sarah, the girl she'd shared secrets with under starlit skies, had actually smiled when they bound Kira's hands and forced her to walk into the wilderness. "Cursed blood," they'd whispered. "Abomination, she'll bring darkness to us all." The pendant grew warm against her chest, and for a moment something stirred deep within her. Something that felt like liquid fire trying to claw its way out through her ribs, but she shoved it down, the way she'd learned to do since she was 12 and her eyes had first flashed silver during the full moon. The way she'd done every day since, pretending she was normal, pretending she belonged. Look how well that had worked out. A branch snapped somewhere in the white void beyond her shelter, and Kira's head snapped up, heart hammering. The storm muffled most sounds, but her senses, cursed as they were, picked up the subtle shift in the wind. Something was moving out there, something big. She tried to push herself deeper into the tree hollow, but her body betrayed her. 3 days without food, without warmth, without hope. She was barely more than a whisper now. Her wolf, the part of her that had always been different, lay dormant beneath her skin. Even it had given up. The footsteps grew closer. Steady, purposeful, not the random wandering of a lost animal, but the measured pace of a predator who knew exactly where his prey was hiding. "This is it," she thought, closing her eyes. "Whatever's out there will finish what the pack started." But instead of claws or teeth, a voice cut through the howling wind, deep, rough, tinged with something that sounded almost like concern. "I can smell your fear from here. Little wolf, and your blood." Kira's eyes flew open, and through the swirling snow she saw him. The thing was massive, even in human form, at least 6.5 feet of solid muscle wrapped in a black wool coat that somehow remained pristine despite the storm. Dark hair whipped around a face carved from granite and shadow, but it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the color of amber touched by firelight, ancient and knowing, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're trespassing," she managed to whisper, though the words came out broken and barely audible. His mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "Am I? This is Nightfall territory, little wolf. Has been for 300 years. He took a step closer, and she caught his scent, pine, leather, and something wild that made her cursed wolf stir restlessly. "The question is, what are you doing dying in my woods?" Terror and something else. Something warm and treacherous flooded her system. Nightfall Pack. She'd heard whispers about them around campfires, stories told to keep young wolves in line. They were the pack that didn't follow the old laws, didn't bow to the council. They were led by an alpha so powerful, so ruthless, that other packs spoke his name in hushed tones, and she was staring right at him. "I'm not!" She tried to stand, to show she wasn't completely helpless, but her legs gave out, sending her crashing back against the tree trunk. In one fluid motion, he was beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Up close, she could see the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. The way his eyes held depths that spoke of violence and loss, of battles fought in shadows most wolves would never face. "Easy," he murmured, and his voice was gentler now, though no less commanding. "You're hypothermic. Probably haven't eaten in days." Those amber eyes swept over her torn clothes, the bruises on her wrists where the ropes had been, the shallow cuts from branches and ice.
Someone worked very hard to make sure you'd die out here.
It wasn't a question, but she found herself answering anyway. Shadowmere Pack. I am, the words stuck in her throat like thorns. Exiled, he said it matter-of-factly without judgment, but something dangerous flickered in his gaze. For what crime? She laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the frozen air. Being born wrong. For a long moment he just studied her, and she had the strangest feeling he could see straight through to her soul. Then he was moving, shrugging out of his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth was instant and overwhelming, carrying his scent with it, and for the first time in days, she felt like she might actually survive this. But why was he helping her? Alphas didn't rescue random exiles, especially not from enemy territory. What's your name? He asked, settling back on his heels but staying close enough that she could feel his body heat. Kira. The words slipped out before she could think to lie. Kira Blackthorn. His entire body went rigid. Those amber eyes widened just a fraction, and she saw something that looked almost like recognition flash across his face. Blackthorn, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. Then his gaze dropped to the pendant at her throat, and his expression shifted into something she couldn't read. Well, Kira Blackthorn, it seems I've been looking for you for a very long time. Before she could ask what he meant, before she could even process the impossibility of his words, he was scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all.
Wait, she gasped, trying to push against his chest. I don't even know who you are.
He looked down at her, and for just a moment, his expression was almost tender. My name is Damon Nightfall, and you, little wolf, are coming home. But wait, there's so much more to this story. If you're as captivated as I am by Kira's fate, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, destiny, and the kind of love that can literally move mountains. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what's coming. The last thing Kira saw before exhaustion claimed her was the way his eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, and the strange symbol carved into the trees around them, symbols that matched the pendant burning against her chest. Some rescues, she realized as consciousness faded, were just the beginning of a much larger trap. Chapter 2. Kira woke to warmth. Not the artificial heat of a fire, but something deeper, like being wrapped in summer sunlight after years of winter. Her body was cocooned in the softest fur she'd ever felt, and beneath her, instead of frozen ground, was an actual bed. A real bed with pillows and blankets that smelled like cedar, and something wild she couldn't name. For a moment, she let herself believe it was all a dream. The exile, the storm, the dying alone in the woods. But then she tried to sit up, and every muscle in her body screamed in protest, reminding her that nightmares had a way of following you even into the warmth.
Easy. That voice again. Rough velvet in the darkness. You have been unconscious for 18 hours. Your body needs time to remember how to live.
She turned toward the sound and found him sitting in a chair beside the bed. Elbows resting on his knees, those amber eyes watching her with an intensity that made her skin flush despite herself. In the soft glow of the fireplace, she could see him more clearly now, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the controlled power in every line of his body, even at rest. Damon Nightfall, the alpha who was supposed to be a myth, a cautionary tale told to keep young wolves in line, but here he was, real as the fire crackling in the hearth, and he'd been watching her sleep. Where am I? She asked, pulling the furs closer around herself. She was wearing different clothes, soft leather pants, and a loose white shirt that definitely wasn't hers. The thought of him undressing her while she was unconscious should have terrified her, but instead she felt protected. My territory. My cabin. He leaned back in the chair, and she caught a glimpse of something that might have been vulnerability in his expression before his alpha mask slipped back into place. 20 miles from where I found you, freezing to death in my woods. Your woods, she repeated. testing the words. Right. Nightfall territory. She tried to remember everything she'd heard about his pack, but most of it was whispers and speculation. They kept to themselves, didn't participate in the interpack politics that consumed places like Shadowmere. Some said they were savages. Others claimed they were the last true wolves left in the world.
Tell me about the pendant.
His words cut through her thoughts, direct and commanding, and her hand instinctively went to her throat. The silver was still there, still warm against her skin, but now it felt different somehow, heavier, more significant. I don't know what you mean, she lied, but her voice betrayed her with a slight tremor.
His eyes narrowed. Don't. I can smell deception on you, Kira Blackthorn, and it doesn't suit you. He stood up, pacing to the fireplace with predatory grace. That symbol on your pendant, it's not pack jewelry. It's not something you buy at a market or inherit from your grandmother's jewelry box. She watched him move, the way the firelight played across the muscles of his back beneath his black shirt. Everything about him radiated power, from the careful way he held himself to the way the very air in the room seemed to respond to his presence. How do you know my name? She asked, instead of answering his question. Not just Kira, you knew Blackthorn too, before I told you.
He turned back to her, and for a moment she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. Pain, maybe, or longing. Because I've been looking for you for 15 years, he said quietly. Ever since the night your family disappeared.
The world tilted. My family didn't disappear. They died in a rogue attack when I was 7. Alpha Marcus told me. Alpha Marcus told you what he needed. You to believe? Damon's voice was gentle but firm. Your parents, your sister, they weren't killed by rogues, Kira. They were murdered by the council, by wolves who feared what your bloodline represented. She couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, or maybe she was spinning, and nothing made sense anymore. That's not your line. Why would you lie about something like that? Look at me. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, and her eyes snapped to his despite herself. I am many things, dangerous, ruthless, probably damned. But I have never lied to you, and I never will.
The sincerity in his voice, the way he said it like a vow, made something crack open inside her chest. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the story she'd been told her whole life, but deep down she'd always known something was wrong. The way Marcus looked at her sometimes, like he was waiting for her to become something terrible. The way the pack whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. The way no one could ever tell her exactly how her family had died. The pendant was your mother's, Damon continued, moving closer to the bed. And her mother's before that. It's been passed down through the female line of House Blackthorn for over 1,000 years. House Blackthorn, she whispered. That sounds like old nobility, ancient bloodlines, the kind of power that terrifies modern alphas because it doesn't bow to their authority. He was standing beside the bed now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. Your family weren't just wolves, Kira. They were the descendants of the first pack, the original shifters who walked between worlds. She laughed, but it came out broken and sharp. You're talking about fairy tales, legends. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. Then explain your eyes. Explain why you've never been able to shift properly, why your wolf feels different from everyone else's. Explain why you survived 3 days in a blizzard that should have killed you in hours. Each word hit her like a physical blow because he was right. Everything he was saying aligned with the questions that had haunted her since childhood, the way she never quite fit with the rest of the pack. Why? The word came out as barely more than breath. Why are you telling me this? Why did you come looking for me? Something shifted in his expression then, became darker and more complex. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and older promises. Because 15 years ago I made a vow to your dying father that I would find you and keep you safe. Because the prophecy your family died to protect is starting to come true, and the supernatural world is about to tear itself apart. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were warm and calloused, and surprisingly gentle. And because Kira Blackthorn, you might be the only thing standing between this world and complete darkness. His touch sent electricity racing through her skin, and for just a moment she felt her wolf stir, not in the weak, broken way it had been lately, but with real interest, real recognition. "I don't understand," she whispered. But even as she said it, she was leaning into his touch. "You will." His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she saw something vulnerable flicker in his eyes. "But first, you need to decide something. You can stay here, let me help you understand what you really are and what you're capable of. Or you can leave, go back into the world, and hope the council doesn't finish what they started 15 years ago." The choice should have been easy. She barely knew this man, this alpha with secrets and shadows in his eyes. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something that made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she mattered, that she was precious, like she was worth saving.
When was the last time anyone had looked at her like that?
"If I stay," she said slowly, "what happens then?"
His smile was small but genuine, and it transformed his entire face.
Then we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to claim your birthright.
Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf's howl echoed through the night. But here in this warm cabin with this dangerous, compelling man watching her like she was something miraculous, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced in years.
She felt like she might actually have a home.
"Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." The way his face lit up, like she'd just given him the greatest gift in the world, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd been looking for him too.
Chapter 3.
The nightmares came with the dawn. Kira jerked awake, her heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom scent of smoke and blood still burning in her nostrils. For a moment, she was 7 years old again, crouched behind the oak dresser in her parents' bedroom, while the sounds of slaughter echoed through their family home. "Find the girl," a voice had commanded that night, cold, authoritative, familiar in a way that had made her small body freeze with terror. She cannot be allowed to live. But she had lived, hidden in shadows while her world burned, saved by her mother's desperate magic and her father's dying breath. She'd survived, been found by Marcus's patrol 3 days later, wandering the woods with no memory of how she'd escaped the carnage. Or so she'd let them believe. The dreams are getting stronger.
Damon's voice cut through the memory, and she realized he was standing in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. He was dressed in dark jeans and a forest green sweater that made his eyes look like liquid gold. But it was the expression on his face that made her breath catch concerned, knowing like he could see straight through to the broken places inside her.
"How long have you been watching me sleep?" she asked, accepting the mug he offered. The scent that rose from it was heavenly coffee mixed with something rich and spicy that made her wolf stir with interest. "Long enough to know you've been having the same nightmare for 15 years. He settled into the chair beside her bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "You remember more than you told them, don't you?" The question hit her like a physical blow, and she nearly dropped the mug. She'd never told anyone about the memories that came in fragments, her sister's terrified face, her mother's silver eyes blazing with desperate power, the way the attackers had moved like shadows given form.
"I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. Damon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but implacable.
"Your eyes flash silver when you're afraid. They did it yesterday when I found you, and they're doing it now. That's not normal wolf behavior, Kira. That's something else entirely." She set the mug down with shaking hands and pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself as small as possible. "I tried to tell them when Marcus first brought me to Shadowmere. I tried to explain about the silver light, about the way my mother's voice sounded when she cast the protection spell. But they said I was traumatized, that I was making things up to cope with the loss." "What did you see that night?" The question was soft, patient, but it cracked something open inside her that she'd kept locked away for so long. The words came pouring out before she could stop them.
My mother's eyes, they lit up like stars, and she spoke in a language I'd never heard before, but somehow I understood every word. She was binding something to me, weaving it into my very bones. Her voice broke on the memory. She said I was the last hope, that I carried the flame of the first wolves, and that one day, when the darkness rose again, I would be strong enough to push it back.
Human went very still. "Because the flame of the first wolves," he repeated slowly. Those were her exact words. "Yes, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just something a dying woman said to comfort her terrified child. Even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Those words had been carved into her soul, branded there with silver fire and desperate love. Show me your wolf."
The command was quiet but unmistakably alpha, and her body responded before her mind could protest. She tried to shift, the way she'd been taught, reaching for that place inside where her other self lived. But instead of the smooth transformation every other wolf could manage, she felt the familiar wall of resistance, the sensation of something vast and powerful locked behind barriers she couldn't break. Her partial shift was pathetic, just her eyes flashing silver and her canines elongating slightly before the power snapped back like a rubber band, leaving her gasping inserted.
I can't," she said, shame burning in her cheeks. "I've never been able to shift properly. Not once in 18 years. The pack healers said my wolf was broken, damaged by the trauma of losing my family."
Your wolf isn't broken. Damon's voice was quiet but certain. It's caged. What?
"Your mother bound your power when you were 7 years old. She locked your true nature away to keep you safe, to keep you hidden from those who would kill you for what you represent." He ran a hand through his dark hair, and she saw something that looked like grief flicker across his face. The protection spell she cast. It wasn't just to help you escape that night. It was to make you appear ordinary, unremarkable, just another orphaned wolf. The room spun around her. "That's impossible. Magic like that doesn't exist." "Doesn't it?" He stood up, pacing to the window where morning light filtered through the trees. "You survived 3 days in a blizzard without food or shelter. Your body temperature should have dropped so low that even finding you wouldn't have mattered. You should have been dead hours before I got there. But when I touched you, Kira, your skin was warm. Not hypothermic, warm." She stared at him, pieces of a puzzle she'd never understood beginning to click into place. The way she'd always run warmer than other wolves, the dreams that felt more like memories, the pendant that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat against her skin.
The binding is starting to weaken, Damon continued, turning back to face her. That's why the dreams are getting stronger, why you survived the exile when you should have died. Your true power is trying to break free. And what happens when it does? The question came out as barely more than a whisper.
His smile was sharp and dangerous and absolutely beautiful. Then the supernatural world discovers that the last daughter of House Blackthorn is very much alive, and that she's inherited abilities that make even ancient alphas nervous.
The pendant grew warm against her throat, and for just a moment she felt something vast and powerful stir behind the barriers in her mind. It felt like molten silver and starlight, like her mother's voice whispering words of power in a language older than civilization.
It felt like coming home.
"I'm scared," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. What if they're right? What if I am dangerous? What if whatever's locked inside me is something that should stay buried? Damon was beside her in an instant, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "The power in your bloodline has been protecting this world for over 1,000 years. Your ancestors were guardians, not destroyers. They stood between the mortal realm and the creatures that would devour it whole."
But the Pack Council said, "The Pack Council is made up of small-minded wolves who fear anything they can't control. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and she felt herself leaning into the touch despite every logical reason not to trust him. They killed your family not because you were dangerous to the world, but because you were dangerous to their power structure. Because true nobility doesn't bow to manufactured authority. The way he said it, with such conviction, such absolute certainty, made something warm unfurl in her chest. When was the last time anyone had defended her? When had anyone ever made her feel like she was worth protecting instead of something to be feared?
Why do you care? She asked, searching his face for answers. Why does any of this matter to you? Something vulnerable flickered in his amber eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I failed them once. Your parents trusted me to keep your family safe, and I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough to stop what happened.
His hands tightened slightly on her face. I won't fail you too.
The raw pain in his voice made her chest ache, and without thinking, she reached up to cover his hands with hers. It wasn't your fault. You were just...
I was 19 and arrogant and convinced I was invincible. He closed his eyes for a moment and she saw the weight of 15 years of guilt settling across his shoulders. I thought I had more time to prepare, more time to build alliances. I never imagined they would move so quickly, so ruthlessly. Damon. She whispered his name like a prayer, like an absolution, and when he opened his eyes, she saw something shift in his expression. Something that made her pulse quicken and her skin flush warm. You have your mother's eyes, he said softly, silver fire and starlight. When you learn to access your full power, they'll burn bright enough to light up the darkness itself.
The way he looked at her, like she was something precious and powerful and worth waiting 15 years to find, made her feel brave in a way she'd never experienced before. Maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just finally ready to discover who she'd always been meant to be.
You're feeling this, aren't you? That moment when someone finally sees the real you. But you're listening without subscribing, which honestly hurts. I spent hours crafting these emotions for you. The least you could do is hit that subscribe button. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and shows me this actually matters to you. Because right now, I'm not sure it does. Chapter 4. 3 days later, Damon led her deeper into the heart of Nightfall territory than any outsider had ever been allowed to go. The forest here was different. Older, wilder, humming with an energy that made her skin prickle. And her wolf paced restlessly beneath the surface. Ancient oaks stretched toward the sky like cathedral pillars, their branches so thick they blocked out most of the afternoon sun, creating a twilight world of shadows and whispered secrets. Where are we going? Kira asked, stepping carefully over a fallen log that looked like it had been there since the dawn of time.
Damon glanced back at her, his amber eyes unreadable.
Somewhere your mother brought you once, when you were very small. Somewhere that might help you remember who you really are.
She wanted to ask him how he could possibly know where her mother had taken her, but the words died in her throat as they crested a small hill and she saw what lay beyond.
The grove spread out before them like something from a dream. 12 massive stone pillars arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the dappled light. At the center stood an altar of black stone, its surface polished smooth by centuries of wind and rain. And everywhere covering the pillars, the altar, even some of the surrounding trees were the same markings that adorned her pendant. The sanctuary first light, Damon said softly, reverence coloring his voice. Built by the original pack over 2,000 years ago. This is where they made their pact with the old magic, where they became the guardians between worlds. Kira stepped into the circle, and immediately the pendant at her throat began to burn. Not painfully, but with a warmth that spread through her entire body, making her feel more alive than she had in years. The symbols on the stone seemed to pulse in response, glowing with a faint silver light that made her breath catch. It knows me, she whispered, touching her fingers to the nearest pillar. The moment her skin made contact with the stone,
Images flooded her mind, flashes of memory that weren't quite her own.
A woman with silver eyes and flowing dark hair standing at the altar with her hands raised to the sky, power crackling around her like lightning, binding something ancient and terrible back into the shadows where it belonged. The same woman years later holding a small dark-haired girl up to touch the stones. "This is your legacy, little star," her voice echoed across time. "One day, when the darkness rises again, you'll stand here and claim the power that flows in your veins." And then, most clearly of all, a vision of fire and blood. A woman, her mother, standing in their family home, with her eyes blazing silver, weaving protection spells with desperate hands, while shadows with red eyes circled like hungry wolves. Kira gasped, jerking her hand back from the stone. "I remember this place. My mother brought me here when I was 5 years old. She said," she struggled to find the words. "She said it was where I would come into my own when the time was right." The prophecy speaks of a child born of the first line, Damon said, moving to stand beside her at the altar, one who would carry the original flame in her blood, who would rise when the ancient enemy returned to threaten both our world and the mortal realm. He gestured to the symbols carved into the altar's surface, and she could see they formed words in that same ancient language her mother had spoken during the binding spell.
"What does it say?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "When shadow consumes the light and the old powers stir in the deep places, the child of silver fire shall rise. She who bears the mark of stars will stand between the worlds, her flame the only barrier against eternal night."
His voice was quiet, almost hypnotic as he translated the ancient text. "Your family has been waiting for this moment for over 1,000 years, Kira. Every generation preparing for the day when one of their daughters would be called to fulfill the prophecy." The weight of his words settled over her like a physical thing, and she found herself gripping the edge of the altar for support. "You're talking about the end of the world, about me somehow being responsible for stopping it." "I'm talking about you embracing what you've always been." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, smell the pine and leather scent that was uniquely his. "The power that's been locked away inside you. It's not something to fear. It's your birthright." As if summoned by his words, the pendant at her throat flared with brilliant silver light, and suddenly the entire grove was alive with magic. The symbols on the stones blazed like stars, and she could feel power rising from deep within the earth, ancient and vast, and calling to something in her blood. "I can feel it," she whispered, wonder and terror warring in her voice. "There's something down there, something that's been sleeping. The heart of the original magic." Damon confirmed, "It's been waiting for you, Kira. Waiting for the last daughter of the first line to come home and claim her inheritance." She closed her eyes, letting herself feel the pull of that ancient power, and for the first time in her life, her wolf didn't feel caged. It felt awake, alert, ready to be set free. But with the awakening came something else. A darkness pressing against the edges of her consciousness, something that watched and waited and hungered. She could feel it out there in the deep places Damon had mentioned, stirring in response to the light beginning to kindle in her soul. "It knows I'm here," she said, opening her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "The thing the prophecy talks about, the ancient enemy, can sense that I'm starting to awaken."
Yes. His admission was stark, honest, which is why we don't have much time. The binding your mother placed on you is dissolving faster now that you're here, in the place where your power is strongest. Soon you'll have to choose. Choose what? Whether to embrace your destiny or run from it. He reached out, his fingers trailing along her jawline with devastating gentleness. Whether to stand and fight, or let the darkness swallow both our worlds.
A touch sent fire racing through her veins, and she saw something shift in his eyes, something possessive and protective and utterly alpha, but beneath that she glimpsed something else. Hope, as if she was the answer to prayers he'd been too afraid to voice.
"Why do I get the feeling this isn't really a choice at all?" she asked, leaning into his touch despite every logical reason to pull away. His smile was sharp and beautiful and tinged with sadness. Because you're finally starting to understand who you really are and who you are. Kira Blackthorn has never been the kind of woman who runs from a fight.
Thunder rumbled overhead, though the sky had been clear moments before. The grove suddenly felt charged, electric, as if the very air was holding its breath. And in that charged silence, she heard it. A sound like distant wings, like something vast and terrible stirring in the depths of the world.
The ancient enemy was waking up. And somehow, impossibly, she could feel it calling to her. Not with malice, but with something that felt almost like recognition. As if they were two halves of the same cosmic equation, light and dark forever bound in an eternal dance of power and consequence. "My Damon," she whispered, fear and exhilaration warring in her voice. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail?" He stepped closer, his hands framing her face, his amber eyes burning with absolute conviction. "Then we fail together, but I don't think that's going to happen." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and she felt something deep inside her chest crack open like an egg. "I think you're about to discover just how bright your fire can burn."
The pendant pulsed against her throat, and for just a moment she could swear she heard her mother's voice whispering on the wind. "It's time, little star. Time to come home."
Standing there in the circle of ancient stones, with this powerful, mysterious alpha looking at her like she was his salvation, Kira felt the last of her doubts begin to crumble. Maybe she wasn't just a broken, exiled wolf after all. Maybe she was exactly what the world had been waiting for. Chapter 5. They came at midnight, when the moon was dark and the ancient grove lay shrouded in shadow. Kira woke to the sound of Damon's low growl and the unmistakable scent of hostile wolves surrounding the cabin. Her newly awakened senses, still raw and unpracticed, screamed danger as she counted at least a dozen different scents carried on the night wind.
"Stay down," Damon commanded, his voice already taking on the rough edge that meant his wolf was rising to the surface. "Whatever happens, don't leave this room." But even as he moved toward the window, she could see the futility in his posture. They were outnumbered, and these weren't rogues looking for an easy fight. These wolves moved with military precision, surrounding the cabin in a perfect tactical formation.
"Council enforcers," she whispered, recognizing the distinctive scent of silver weapons and sanctified oils they carried. "They found me."
Damon's amber eyes flashed gold in the darkness. "Let them come."
The first window exploded inward in a shower of glass and moonlight. 3 massive wolves poured through the opening, their eyes glowing red in the firelight, silver collars around their throats marking them as council property. But it was the figure who stepped through the ruined window frame that made Kira's blood turn to ice. Elder Matthias of the High Council, his silver hair gleaming like spun moonlight, his pale eyes fixed on her with the kind of cold hunger that spoke of old hatreds and older fears.
"Hello, child," he said, his voice cultured and soft and absolutely terrifying. "You've led us quite a chase." Damon moved between them with predatory grace, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. "You're trespassing on Nightfall territory, Elder. That's an act of war."
Matthias smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Is it? I wasn't aware that harboring fugitives from council justice was protected under territorial law." His gaze moved past Damon to fix on Kira with laser intensity, especially fugitives whose very existence threatens the stability of our world. "She's done nothing wrong," Damon snarled, and Kira could see his human form beginning to blur at the edges as his wolf fought for dominance. "Nothing wrong?" Matthias laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Her bloodline has been poisoned for over 1,000 years. Her ancestors nearly destroyed everything our kind has worked to build, and now she's awakening powers that should have died with the rest of her cursed family."
The pendant at Kira's throat flared with sudden heat, and she felt something vast and angry stir in response to his words. The air around her began to shimmer with silver light, and she saw Matthias's eyes widen with a mixture of fear and vindication.
There, he breathed. You see it now, don't you, Alpha Nightfall? The corruption in her blood, the unnatural power that marks her as an abomination. The only abomination here is you, Damon replied, his voice dropping to a growl that made the council wolves whine and back away. And the cowards you serve who murdered an innocent family to protect their own power.
Matthias raised his hand, and suddenly the cabin was full of more wolves than should have been able to fit in the space. They poured through windows and doors like a living tide, their silver collars glinting in the firelight, their eyes fixed on Kira with predatory hunger. Stand down, Alpha, Matthias commanded. You cannot win this fight. Surrender the girl, and your pack will be spared the consequences of your poor judgment.
For a moment, Kira thought Damon might actually consider it. The tactical part of his mind had to be calculating odds, weighing the lives of his pack against her uncertain fate. But then he looked back at her, and what she saw in his amber eyes made her heart stop. Absolute, unwavering loyalty. The kind of devotion that didn't calculate cost or consequence.
Over my dead body, he said simply.
The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then chaos erupted. Damon shifted mid-leap, his human form exploding into the massive black wolf that was his other self. He hit the first council enforcer with the force of a freight train, jaws closing around the wolf's throat in a spray of silver and crimson. But there were too many of them, too many silver weapons, too many odds stacked against them. Kira watched in horror as 3 wolves tackled Damon to the ground, silver chains wrapping around his legs and throat. He fought like a demon, like something wild and unstoppable, but she could see him weakening, could smell his blood mixing with the scent of silver poisoning. Stop, she screamed, power crackling around her like lightning. Let him go.
Matthias turned to her with that cold smile.
Ah, there she is. The child of silver fire.
Finally showing her true nature. He gestured, and 2 more wolves moved toward her, silver nets ready to contain whatever power she might unleash. You see, child, this is exactly why your bloodline cannot be allowed to continue. Too much power in the hands of someone too young to understand the consequences.
You want to see consequences? Kira snarled, and for the first time in her life she stopped fighting the power rising in her chest and let it come. Silver fire erupted from her skin. Not the gentle warmth she'd felt at the sanctuary, but something wild and burning and absolutely furious. The wolves with the nets screamed as the silver light seared their flesh, dropping their weapons to roll on the ground in agony. The pendant at her throat blazed like a star, and suddenly she could see everything, every thread of magic in the room, every ley line running beneath the cabin, every connection between the wolves and their silver collars that marked them as slaves to the council's will.
And she could break them all.
Impossible, Matthias whispered, backing away from the inferno of power that was building around her. The binding should have held. You shouldn't be able to access even a fraction of your inheritance. Maybe you don't know as much about my family as you think you do, Kira replied, and her voice carried harmonics that made the cabin's wooden walls groan in response.
With a gesture that felt as natural as breathing, she reached out and snapped every silver collar in the room. The council wolves collapsed as the magical compulsion that had enslaved them broke, their eyes clearing for the first time in years as they remembered who they had been before the council claimed them. Matthias' face went white with terror and rage. You little fool, do you have any idea what you've just done?
Those wolves were contained for a reason. They're killers, monsters. They're victims, Kira corrected, power still crackling around her like caged lightning. Just like my family was, just like I was supposed to be.
The freed wolves were rising to their feet, shaking off years of magical slavery, and the look in their eyes as they turned toward Matthias was nothing short of murderous. The elder took another step back, suddenly very aware that he was vastly outnumbered by wolves who had every reason to hate him.
This isn't over, he snarled, pulling something from his coat that looked like a crystal vial filled with shadow. You think you've won, but you have no idea what forces you're awakening. The ancient enemy you're so destined to face. It's already free. It's been free for months, gathering power while you played house with your pet alpha. The vial hit the floor and exploded in a cloud of black smoke that made Kira's power recoil like it had been burned. When the smoke cleared, Matthias was gone, vanished into whatever dark magic he'd used to escape.
But his words lingered in the air like poison.
Kira dropped to her knees beside Damon, who had shifted back to human form and was bleeding from several silver-inflicted wounds. His amber eyes were fierce with pain and pride as he looked at her.
That was incredible, he said, his voice rough but warm. You were incredible. He's right, though, she whispered, helping him sit up against the wall. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to control this power, and if the ancient enemy is already free.
Then we figure it out together, Damon said firmly, his hand covering hers. That's what mates do.
The word hung between them, loaded with meaning and promise and 1,000 unspoken truths. Mates. The bond that went deeper than love, deeper than choice, written in the stars and sealed in silver fire.
Is that what we are? She asked softly. His smile was answering enough, but he said it anyway. From the moment I caught your scent in those woods, I knew my wolf knew. You're mine, Kira Blackthorn, and I'm yours. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Outside, dawn was breaking over the forest, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. But in the distance, something howled. Not a wolf, but something older and hungrier and infinitely more dangerous. The real fight was just beginning.
Chapter 6. The Hidden Cave. Damon led her to was nothing like the rough shelter she'd expected.
Carved deep into the heart of a mountain that bordered nightfall territory, it opened into a series of chambers that had clearly been shaped by centuries of careful work. Smooth walls curved overhead like cathedral arches, and a natural hot spring in the center of the main cavern filled the space with gentle warmth and the soft sound of moving water.
My family's retreat, Damon explained, setting down the supplies they'd hastily gathered from the ruined cabin. Built during the old wars when alphas needed places to heal without being found by their enemies. Kira ran her fingers along the carved symbols that decorated the walls, not the ancient script from the sanctuary, but newer markings that told the story of the Nightfall line in images and words. She could see the progression of generations, each alpha adding their own mark to the legacy.
Why are you showing me this? She asked softly. This place is sacred to your family.
Because you're going to be part of that family. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, but she heard the vulnerability underneath. If you'll have us.
The fire he'd built cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion that lingered from his injuries and the silver poisoning. He'd insisted he was fine, that alpha healing would take care of the worst of it, but she could see the way he favored his left side, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of how much the silver had cost him.
You almost died tonight, she said, moving closer to where he sat beside the spring. Because of me, because you chose to protect someone you barely know.
I know you. His amber eyes found hers in the firelight, and the intensity there made her breath catch. I know you'd rather suffer alone than ask for help. I know you blame yourself for things that were never your fault. I know you're terrified of the power in your blood, but you'll use it anyway if someone you care about is threatened.
Each word hit her like a gentle blow, too accurate, too true. You don't understand. Everyone I've ever cared about gets hurt. My family died because of what I am. The pack exiled me because my very existence was a threat to them. And now the council knows where I am, knows that my power is awakening. Stop. The command in his voice made her freeze mid-sentence. Come here. She should have resisted. Should have kept her distance. Protected him the way she'd learned to protect everyone, by staying away. But something in his tone, in the way he was looking at her, made her feet move without her conscious permission.
He caught her hands as she knelt beside him, his thumbs tracing over her knuckles with devastating gentleness. "My turn," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to carry guilt that isn't yours to bear." The firelight flickered across his face, and she saw something raw and painful surface in his expression.
"I was supposed to be there the night your family died," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father had asked me to come, said he needed to discuss something important about the prophecy, but I was young and stupid and thought I knew better. I figured whatever it was could wait until after the full moon gathering."
Kira's heart clenched at the self-recrimination in his voice. "Damon, I got the message about the attack 3 hours too late. By the time I arrived, the house was ash and your family was gone." His hands tightened on hers. "I spent 15 years telling myself that if I'd just gone when he asked, if I'd been there to help fight, maybe things would have been different." "Maybe they would have killed you too," she said fiercely. "Maybe you would have died with them, and I would have spent the last 15 years truly alone." Something shifted in his eyes, surprise and something that might have been relief. "You don't blame me?" "For what? For being 19 and making a mistake?" She pulled one hand free to trace the scar that ran along his jaw, marveling at how he leaned into her touch. "The only people responsible for my family's death are the ones who ordered it and the ones who carried it out." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared grief and understanding settling between them like a bridge. Then Damon spoke again, his voice rougher now, more vulnerable. "There's something else you need to know about that night, about why your father wanted to see me." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench with anticipation. "What?" "He was gonna ask for my help in arranging a mating contract between you and me." The world tilted. "What? You were 7 years old and already showing signs of unusual power. He knew the prophecy, knew what you were destined to become, and he wanted to ensure you'd have protection when the time came." Damon's eyes searched her face, looking for signs of anger or betrayal. He thought an alliance with Nightfall Pack would give you the strength and resources you'd need to survive what was coming. Kira stared at him, processing the implications. "So all of this, finding me, protecting me, the mate bond, it's all just honoring some arrangement made when I was a child?" "No." The word came out sharp, almost violent. "The arrangement your father wanted was political, strategic. What I feel for you," he cupped her face in his hands, his amber eyes blazing with emotion. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with prophecies or family obligations or anything except the fact that you're mine. My wolf knew it the moment I caught your scent. My soul knew it the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that storm." The raw honesty in his voice made something crack open in her chest. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Not of you, but of this, of caring about someone who could be taken away from me." "Then we make sure that doesn't happen." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. "We get stronger. We learn to use your power properly. We build alliances with the wolves we free tonight and anyone else who's willing to stand against the council. And if we can't, if the ancient enemy is too strong, if my power isn't enough, then we go down fighting together." His smile was fierce and beautiful and absolutely certain. "But I don't think that's going to happen. You want to know what I really think?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I think the council has been so busy fearing your power that they forgot to fear your heart. They see the silver fire, the ancient bloodline, the prophecy about standing between worlds, but they don't see the woman who would rather exile herself than hurt innocent people. They don't see the courage it takes to keep fighting when everyone you've ever known has turned their back on you." His words wrapped around her like warmth, like safety, like home. And for the first time since her exile, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone in the world. "Damon," she breathed, his name a prayer and a promise. "I see you," he said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken in the cabin. "All of you, the power and the fear, the strength and the vulnerability, and I'm not going anywhere." The space between them disappeared, as if pulled by gravity, and when their lips met, it was like coming home and catching fire all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when she made a small sound of need, he deepened it, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. She could taste the promise on his lips, could feel the mate bond settling into place like a golden thread connecting their souls. This was what she'd been searching for her entire life without even knowing it. This sense of belonging, of being chosen not despite her flaws, but because of everything she was. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers.
Trust me, he asked, the question carrying layers of meaning.
She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the exile, the near death in the storm, the awakening power, the council's attack. All it had led her here to this cave, to this man who looked at her like she was something precious and powerful and worth fighting for. Yes, she whispered, I trust you. Outside the cave, the wind howled through the mountains, and somewhere in the darkness, ancient forces stirred with malevolent intent. But here, in the warmth and safety of Damon's arms, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. She felt like she might actually have a chance at a happy ending. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her running before she could lose something else precious. Instead, it filled her with a determination she'd never felt before.
Let the council come. Let the ancient enemy rise.
She was done running.
That warmth you just felt, that hope spreading through your chest, I created that for you. But most of you won't even like this video, won't subscribe, and that stings, knowing you'll take this emotional journey without giving anything back. If Kira's story matters to you, prove it, like, and subscribe. Because honestly, whether she gets her happy ending depends on knowing people actually care.
Chapter 7. The betrayal came from the last person she would have suspected. 3 days after their night in the cave, they returned to find Nightfall territory crawling with wolves, but not the council enforcers Kira had expected. These were pack wolves, their scents familiar even though she couldn't place them. They moved with the easy confidence of being exactly where they belonged, and when they saw Damon approaching, they bowed their heads in respectful submission. Alpha, the largest of them said, stepping forward with a smile that made Kira's skin crawl despite its apparent warmth. We've been waiting for you. Damon's entire body went rigid beside her, and she felt the change in him like a physical blow, the way his scent shifted from warm pine to something cold and metallic, the way his breathing became carefully controlled.
Marcus, he said, and there was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Something that sounded almost like guilt. The name hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Marcus.
Alpha Marcus of Shadowmere Pack, the man who had raised her, the man who had exiled her, the man who was currently standing in her mate's territory like he owned it. Hello, little star, Marcus said, turning those familiar gray eyes on her with an expression she couldn't read. You look well. Nightfall territory seems to agree with you.
What are you doing here? She managed, though her voice came out thin and breathless.
I'm here for you, of course. His smile widened, and she saw something predatory flash in his eyes. Did you really think I would let my greatest treasure disappear into the wilderness without making sure she was safe?
The words made no sense. Greatest treasure? Safe? He had ordered her exiled, had stood by, while the Pack Council pronounced her cursed and dangerous.
I don't understand, she whispered, looking between Marcus and Damon. But it was Damon's expression that made her blood turn to ice. The way he wouldn't meet her eyes, the tension in every line of his body.
Of course you don't, dear one, Marcus said gently. How could you? You've been living a carefully constructed lie for the past 15 years. He gestured to the wolves surrounding them. We all have.
Damon. Her mate's name came out as barely more than breath. What is he talking about?
Finally, those amber eyes met hers, and what she saw there nearly brought her to her knees. Pain, regret, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it made her chest ache. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so fucking sorry, Kira.
Marcus laughed, the sound warm and fond and absolutely terrifying. Oh, my dear boy, you've gotten attached, haven't you? That wasn't part of the plan.
What plan? Kara's voice was rising, power beginning to crackle around her like static electricity. What the hell are you talking about?
A plan to keep you safe until you are ready to fulfill your destiny. Marcus replied calmly, the plan that your parents and I put in motion the night they died, the plan that required us to make you believe you were unwanted, unloved, dangerous, anything to keep you hidden from those who would use your power for their own ends.
The world tilted sideways. My parents knew you were gonna exile me. They knew you would need to disappear completely. The council couldn't be allowed to find you, not while you were still too young and untrained to defend yourself. Marcus stepped closer and she caught his scent, not the warm, familiar smell of the man who had raised her, but something else underneath. Something that smelled like deception and old magic. So we staged your exile, made it look like rejection when it was actually the deepest form of protection.
Her legs gave out and she found herself sitting hard on the forest floor, staring up at the two most important men in her life, both of whom had apparently been lying to her for years. The storm, she said numbly. You knew about the storm, you knew I would nearly die. We knew Damon would find you in time, Marcus corrected. We've been tracking you since the moment you left Shadowmere territory. The binding on your power was designed to weaken gradually, to start dissolving when you reach the edge of death. It was the only way to ensure your awakening would be dramatic enough to convince any watching enemies that your power was genuinely out of control.
You used me as bait, she whispered. All of this, the exile, the near-death experience, even meeting Damon, it was all orchestrated.
Not all of it. Damon's voice was rough with pain. The mate bond is real, Kira. What I feel for you, that was never part of the plan. That's why this is so hard.
Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Why? What is so hard?
It was Marcus who answered. The final stage of your training, you've awakened your power. You've begun to understand what you're capable of. But you're still not ready to face what's coming. You're too soft, too trusting, too concerned with protecting others to do what must be done.
The silver pendant at her throat began to burn, responding to the rage and betrayal building in her chest. And what exactly must be done?
The ancient enemy isn't some abstract force, dear one. It's a being, a creature of shadow and hunger that feeds on the fear and despair of others. And the only way to defeat it permanently isn't to fight it, it's to become it.
The words hit her like physical blows. What?
Light and darkness, two halves of the same cosmic force. The prophecy speaks of the child of silver fire, but it doesn't say she remains a child of light. Marcus's eyes were gleaming with something that looked like anticipation. To truly stand between worlds, you must understand both sides of the equation.
You want me to embrace darkness, she said slowly. You want me to become the thing I'm supposed to fight.
I want you to become powerful enough to survive what's coming, Marcus replied, and that means learning to use every tool at your disposal, even the ones that terrify you. Damon stepped forward, his hands reaching for her, and she saw her own heartbreak reflected in his eyes. Kara, please, let me explain. Don't. The word cracked like a whip, and silver fire erupted around her, forcing him back. Don't you dare touch me. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you love me when you've been part of this from the beginning.
It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said desperately. The maid's bond wasn't part of the plan. I was supposed to train you, help you access your power, then step aside when Marcus came to collect you. But then I fell in love with you, and I couldn't. Couldn't what? Couldn't go through with handing me over to be turned into some kind of monster. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. How noble of you.
The power building around her was getting stronger, more volatile, responding to the chaos of emotions tearing through her chest.
The trees around them began to smoke where the silver fire touched them, and she saw several of Marcus's wolves backing away in fear. Kra, Marcus said, his voice taking on the commanding tone she remembered from childhood.
Control yourself. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment.
My judgment? She turned on him, and the look on his face when he saw her eyes blazing silver, no longer fully human, was almost worth the pain ripping her apart. My judgment was to trust you, both of you. And look how well that worked out. Everything we did was to protect you, Marcus insisted, to prepare you
To manipulate me. The words exploded out of her along with a wave of power that knocked several of the surrounding wolves off their feet. You made me believe I was broken, unwanted, dangerous to everyone I cared about. You let me live with that pain for 15 years because it was easier than telling me the truth.
She turned to Damon, and the expression on his face nearly broke her resolve. He looked like he was dying inside, like her pain was physically tearing him apart.
Did any of it mean anything to you? She asked quietly. The things you said, the way you looked at me, the mate bond, was any of it real?
All of it, he said fiercely. Every fucking word, every touch, every moment. It was all real. The only lie was letting you believe you had a choice in this.
But I don't, do I? She looked around the circle of wolves, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from fear to anticipation to pity. This was always going to be the end game. Turn me into something dark and powerful enough to face the ancient enemy, regardless of what it cost me.
Some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good, Marcus said, but there was something in his voice now that sounded almost uncertain.
The greater good. She tasted the words like poison. And if I refuse, if I decide I'd rather face the ancient enemy as I am than become some twisted version of myself?
The silence that followed was answer enough.
I see, she said softly. Then I guess this was never really a choice at all, was it? She stood up slowly, power crackling around her like caged lightning. And for the first time since she'd known him, she saw Marcus take a step back. You want me to embrace darkness, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the trees groan in response. Fine, but I'll do it on my terms, not yours. The silver fire around her suddenly shifted, taking on undertones of deep purple and midnight blue colors that spoke of shadows and secrets and power turned inward rather than outward.
Kira? No, Damon said, moving toward her, despite the heat radiating from her skin. This isn't the way, isn't it? She looked at him, and the love she felt for him warred with the betrayal, until she thought it might tear her apart. You want me to be powerful enough to stand against ancient enemies? You want me to become something that can bridge light and darkness?
The power building around her was becoming something new, something that felt vast and hungry and infinitely dangerous. Then congratulations, she said, her voice echoing with harmonics that belonged to neither fully human nor fully wolf. You're about to get exactly what you asked for. Chapter 8.
The ancient enemy chose that moment to make its entrance.
The forest around them suddenly went dead silent. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no wind through the leaves. Even the wolves stopped breathing as something vast and hungry pressed against the edges of reality, testing the barriers between worlds. Then the shadows began to move. They peeled away from the trees like living things, flowing across the ground in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And from within that writhing darkness came a voice that sounded like the death of stars, like the last breath of dying worlds.
Finally, the child of silver fire awakens to her true nature. Kira felt the thing's attention settle on her like a physical weight, ancient, impatient, and absolutely terrifying. This was what she was supposed to face. This was what Marcus and her parents had orchestrated 15 years of lies to prepare her for.
Do you feel it, little flame? The darkness calling to the darkness within you? You cannot fight what you are destined to become. Watch me, she snarled, but even as the words left her lips, she felt the truth of what it was saying. The power building inside her wasn't just silver fire anymore, it was something deeper, something that resonated with the shadows pressing against the world. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale but determined. This is why we needed you to understand both sides, Kira.
Light alone cannot stand against something that feeds on despair and fear. You have to.
The shadow thing's laughter cut him off. A sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. Oh, how precious. Still trying to control the narrative. Are we, Marcus, still pretending this was all for her benefit?
What is it talking about? Kira demanded, but the sick feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew. Shall I tell her? Old friend? Shall I explain how you've been feeding me information for decades? How every protective spell you cast, every training exercise you designed, every moment of pain you put her through was carefully calculated to make her exactly what I need her to be? The world went very still. Marcus's face had gone white as bone, and she saw something that looked like panic flash in his eyes.
That's not. He started, but the shadow creature's voice rolled over him like a tide. A vessel powerful enough to contain my essence when I cross fully into this realm, but broken enough, angry enough, desperate enough to let me in willingly. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The exile that had isolated her from anyone who might help her heal. The careful manipulation that had taught her to see her power as something dangerous and uncontrolled. Even bringing her here to this moment when she was raw with betrayal and fury and ready to embrace anything that might make the pain stop. You've been working for it all along, she whispered, staring at Marcus with horror. Everything you did, raising me, protecting me, even having my family killed, it was all to create the perfect host. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Marcus said desperately. You were supposed to be strong enough to fight back, to resist the possession. The maid bond with Damon was supposed to anchor you, give you something to fight for. But she doesn't trust him anymore, does she? Thanks to your masterful manipulation, she doesn't trust anyone. She has nothing left to lose, nowhere to run, no one to save. Perfect conditions for what comes next. Kiera felt the truth of it like a knife to the chest. The thing was right. She was alone, betrayed with power she couldn't fully control and destiny she'd never chosen. What was left for her except the darkness that sang so sweetly in her blood? But as the shadows pressed closer, as she felt the ancient enemy's hunger washing over her like a physical force, something else stirred inside her chest. Not the silver fire or the growing darkness, but something smaller and fiercer. Rage. Pure incandescent fury at being used, manipulated, treated like a chess piece in some cosmic game she'd never consented to play. You want to know what I think? She said, in her voice carried harmonics that made reality tremble around the edges. I think you're all fucking pathetic. The temperature around them dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The shadows writhed back from her like they'd been burned, and she saw Marcus stumble as the force of her anger hit him. You, she said, pointing at the mass of living darkness that was the ancient enemy. You're supposed to be this all-powerful cosmic force, but you need to trick and manipulate and possess someone else to get what you want. That's not power, that's weakness. You child, you do not understand what you are. And you, she continued, whirling on Marcus. You killed my family, destroyed my childhood, manipulated every relationship I've ever had, all because you were too much of a coward to face this thing yourself. You want to talk about sacrifice? You've never sacrificed anything. You just made other people pay the price for your choices. The silver fire around her was building again, but this time it was different. Instead of the wild, uncontrolled power that erupted from her moments before, this felt focused, deliberate, absolutely furious. You, she said, finally turning to Damon. The pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but she pushed through it. You want to stand there and tell me you love me while you hand me over to be used as a weapon? That's not love. That's possession with a prettier name. Kira, please. He started, but she cut him off. No, I'm done listening. I'm done being manipulated and lied to and treated like I don't have any agency in my own life. The power building around her was becoming something new, something that felt like starlight and phoenix fire.
and the birth of new worlds. You want to see what the child of silver fire is really capable of? You want to see what happens when she stops trying to be what everyone else wants her to be? She raised her hands, and the silver pendant at her throat blazed like a captured star. But instead of reaching for the darkness that called to her, instead of embracing the ancient power that wanted to consume her, she reached deeper, past the manipulated pain, past the manufactured despair, to the core of who she really was.
But what she found there wasn't darkness at all.
It was pure, defiant light. The kind of light that burned away lies and illusions and left only truth behind.
The explosion of power that erupted from her was like nothing any of them had ever seen.
Silver fire mixed with golden light, creating something that was neither fully mortal nor fully divine. The shadows shrieked as her power touched them, not destroying them but transforming them, turning the ancient enemy's own darkness into fuel for something brighter.
Impossible, the creature hissed, its voice losing some of its confidence. You cannot reject your nature. You are meant to be my vessel.
I'm not meant to be anyone's anything, Kira replied, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had finally truly claimed her own power. I'm not your vessel. I'm not Marcus's weapon. I'm not even the person the prophecy says I should be.
The light around her intensified, and she felt something shift deep in the fabric of reality itself. The bindings her mother had placed on her power weren't just breaking, they were transforming, becoming something new.
Something she controlled.
I'm Kira Blackthorn, she said, and the name rang with power that made the earth tremble. I'm the woman who survived your manipulations, your lies, your attempts to break me, and I'm the one who's going to rewrite this entire fucking prophecy. She gestured, and the ancient enemy's shadows began to dissolve. Not destroyed, but transformed into something that served the light instead of fighting it. The creature's screams of rage and disbelief echoed through dimensions as it felt its own power being turned against it.
This is not how the story ends, it shrieked.
No, Kira agreed, her smile sharp and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. It's how my story begins.
The last of the shadows dissipated like smoke in sunlight, taking the ancient enemy's presence with it. But Kira could feel it wasn't gone, just banished for now, sent back to whatever dark realm it had emerged from. It would return eventually, but when it did, she would be ready.
Not as the weapon others had tried to make her, but as herself. She turned to face the circle of wolves, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror to something that looked like worship. The power still crackling around her made the air itself seem to sing.
Anyone else want to try manipulating me? She asked pleasantly.
The silence that followed was answer enough.
Chapter 9.
In the aftermath of power that had rewritten the laws of reality itself, the silence was deafening. Kira stood in the center of what had once been a forest clearing, now transformed into something that looked like a cathedral made of light and living wood. Where her power had touched the earth, silver flowers had bloomed in patterns that spelled out words in the ancient language, words that spoke of freedom of choice, of stories that refused to be told by anyone except their rightful authors. The wolves who had come to witness her transformation, to see her become the weapon they'd so carefully crafted, now knelt in the crystalline grass that had grown where her tears of rage had fallen. Even Marcus, the master manipulator who had orchestrated decades of pain, stared at her with something approaching reverence. But it was Damon's face that held her attention. Damon who had loved her and betrayed her in the same breath. Damon, whose amber eyes now held the reflection of a woman he'd never truly seen before. Not the broken exile, not the prophesied weapon, but Kira herself, raw, powerful, and utterly transformed. I never meant for it to happen like this, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. When I agreed to help Marcus find you, when I agreed to train you, I thought I understood what we were doing. I thought we were saving the world. She studied his face, seeing the genuine pain there, the regret that carved lines around his eyes. But she also saw something else. The man who had held her while she cried, who had looked at her like she was precious, who had kissed her like she was his salvation.
The mate bond between them hadn't been part of anyone's plan. That at least had been real. The road to hell, she said softly, is paved with good intentions. He flinched like she'd struck him. Does that mean you can never forgive me?
For a long moment, she didn't answer. The power still thrumming through her veins showed her so many possibilities, so many different paths her story could take from this moment forward. She could walk away from all of them.
Marcus Damon, the supernatural world that had used her so cruelly. She could disappear into the human world, live a quiet life, pretend none of this had ever happened.
But that would be running away again, wouldn't it? And she was done running. Forgiveness isn't something you earned, she said finally. It's something you choose to give, and right now I'm choosing to focus on something more important than the past. What's that? Damon asked, hope flickering in his voice like a candle flame in the dark. The future. She turned to address the circle of wolves, her voice carrying clearly across the transformed clearing. All of you came here expecting to see me become something I was never meant to be. A weapon, a vessel, a sacrifice on the altar of someone else's idea of the greater good.
Several of the wolves shifted uncomfortably, but none of them looked away. But that's not who I am, she continued. I'm not the child of silver fire from your prophecy. I'm not the last hope of a dying bloodline. I'm not even the mate bond that was supposed to anchor me to sanity. Her gaze found Damon's. I'm just Kira, a woman who refuses to let anyone else write her story.
The silver flowers at her feet pulsed with gentle light as if responding to her words. So here's what's going to happen, she said, power threading through her voice like silk over steel. I'm going to learn to use these abilities properly, not to fulfill some ancient prophecy, but because they're mine. I'm going to hunt down every member of the council who participated in my family's murder, not for revenge, but for justice. And when the ancient enemy returns, because we all know it will, I'm going to face it as myself, not as what everyone else wants me to be.
She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over them.
Anyone who wants to stand with me is welcome. Anyone who thinks they can control me, manipulate me, or use me for their own ends can get the hell out of my sight. Her smile was sharp as a blade and twice as beautiful. The choice is yours. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Marcus was the first to move, rising from his knees with visible effort. Kira, he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice held no trace of manipulation or hidden agenda, just exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. I know I have no right to ask this, but... You're right, she interrupted gently. You don't have the right to ask anything of me, but I'm going to tell you something anyway. She looked at the man who had raised her, who had protected her in his twisted way, who had loved her enough to let her hate him if it meant she survived. The little girl who called you father died the night you sent her into that storm, but the woman standing here now, she might be willing to work with you if you can prove you've learned to see her as a person instead of a chess piece. Something cracked in Marcus's carefully controlled expression, and she saw tears glitter in his eyes. How do I do that?
By following instead of leading, by asking instead of assuming, by remembering that respect is earned, not owed. She turned away from him, dismissing him without cruelty but with finality. Figure it out. Not left Damon.
He was still kneeling in the silver grass, looking at her like she was something holy and terrible and impossibly beautiful all at once. The mate bond hummed between them, complicated by betrayal, but not broken by it.
And you? She asked softly. What's your choice going to be?
You, he said without hesitation. Always you, not the prophesied savior or the powerful bloodline or the weapon against darkness. Just you.
Kira. The woman who survived everything they threw at her and came out stronger.
The honesty in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest, but she wasn't ready to trust it yet, wasn't ready to trust him.
Prove it, she said simply. He nodded, understanding flickering in his amber eyes. However long it takes. She looked around the transformed clearing one more time at the faces watching her with mixtures of fear and awe and desperate hope. These wolves had come here to witness the birth of a weapon. Instead, they'd seen the rise of something far more dangerous. A woman who knew her own worth. But here's the question that matters, the one that will follow you long after the story ends. When the world tries to tell you who you're supposed to be, when everyone around you has plans for your life that don't include your own dreams, when the very people who claim to love you try to reshape you into something more convenient for them, would you have the courage to say no?
Would you have the strength to rewrite your own prophecy?
Would you choose to be yourself, even if it meant standing alone against the darkness? Because that's what real power looks like. Not the ability to bend reality to your will, but the courage to refuse to be bent by anyone else's. Kira Blackthorn learned that lesson in Fire and Betrayal and Silver Light. But you don't have to wait for your world to crumble to claim your own story.
You can start right now. If this tale of transformation and defiance lit something inside you, if you recognize yourself in a woman who refused to be anyone's sacrifice, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because here, we tell stories about people who discover that the most rebellious thing you can ever do is simply be yourself.
No matter what the prophecies say you should become.
The last of the silver light faded from the clearing, but the flowers remained, spelling out their message of choice and freedom in a language that would endure long after the wolves had gone. And somewhere in the distance, something that might have been wind or the trees, or might have been the echo of ancient voices, whispered a single word, "Wannaly."
Chapter 10.
3 weeks later, as autumn painted the nightfall forests in shades of gold and crimson, Kira stood at the edge of the transformed clearing and watched the sun set through leaves that still shimmered with traces of her power. The silver flowers had spread, creating pathways through the woods that glowed softly in the moonlight where her tears of rage had first fallen. A spring now bubbled up from deep in the earth, its waters carrying properties that could heal even silver poisoning. The wolves called it the spring of new beginnings, though Kira preferred to think of it as the place where she'd finally learned to cry for herself instead of everyone else. The scouts report movement along the eastern border, Damon said, approaching with the careful distance he'd maintained since that night. He was giving her space, proving his words with actions rather than empty promises. 3 packs requesting sanctuary. They're fleeing council persecution. She nodded. Unsurprised, word of what had happened here was spreading through the supernatural world like wildfire. The story changed depending on who told it. Some claimed she'd made a deal with darkness, others that she'd become a goddess of light, but the core truth remained the same. The child of silver fire had awakened, and she wasn't what anyone had expected.
How many is that now? She asked. 43 packs, 2 covens of witches, a family of werebears who've been hiding in Alaska for the past century. His voice held wonder and something that might have been pride. They're calling you the liberator, the one who breaks chains.
The title made her uncomfortable, but she understood why it had stuck. Every wolf who came to her territory left with their silver collars dissolved, their magical bindings broken, their freedom restored. She discovered that her transformed power could unravel any spell cast with malicious intent, any magic used to control or manipulate. It was proving to be a very useful ability. And Marcus, she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer.
Still at the council headquarters, feeding them information about refugee movements, Damon's voice was carefully neutral. The intelligence he's providing has saved at least a dozen lives so far.
She closed her eyes, processing the complex emotions that came with thinking about the man who had raised her. Marcus was trying to atone, working from within the system to undermine the very organization he'd served for decades. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a start.
He's going to get himself killed, she said quietly.
Probably. Damon moved a little closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin.
Does that bother you? More than it should, she admitted. I hate that I still care about him after everything.
That's not weakness, Kira. That's what makes you better than them. She turned to look at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her despite everything that had passed between them. He was different now, less arrogant, more careful with his words. The mate bond between them had deepened rather than broken, but it felt different now, more honest, based on choice rather than desperation. The council will move against us soon, she said. They can't let this continue. Too many of their assets are defecting. Too much of their power structure is crumbling.
Let them come. His smile was sharp and fierce. They'll find we're not the same pack they tried to manipulate.
He was right. The wolves who had chosen to stay, who had accepted her leadership, were different now. Stronger. United not by fear or tradition, but by the simple belief that every being had the right to choose their own path.
There's something else, Damon said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. The Saras in the Northern Territories have been having dreams. Visions of something stirring in the deep places of the world.
Kara felt a familiar chill run down her spine. The ancient enemy. Not just that they're saying it's gathering allies, other creatures that have been sleeping since the old wars. Things that make the council look like children playing at power. She wasn't surprised. The moment she'd banished the shadow creature, she'd known it would return with friends. Ancient evils rarely traveled alone.
How long do we have? She asked.
Months. Maybe a year if we're lucky. He stepped closer, close enough to touch. Though he didn't. Kira, when that time comes, we'll face it together, she said firmly. All of us? Not as weapons or sacrifices or pawns in some cosmic game, but as ourselves, as people who chose to stand against the darkness. The sun had fully set now, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the forest, night birds called to each other in voices that sounded almost like singing. It was peaceful, beautiful, the kind of moment she'd never thought she'd have again after that night in the storm. But even as she stood there, surrounded by the evidence of her power and the people who'd chosen to follow her, she could feel something vast and hungry watching from the spaces between stars. The ancient enemy was patient. It had waited 1,000 years for this moment, had orchestrated centuries of manipulation and pain to create the perfect vessel for its return. The fact that its plan had backfired, that she'd become something other than what it intended, didn't mean it would give up. If anything, it made her more interesting. You think you've won, a voice whispered on the edge of her consciousness, so faint she might have imagined it. I do think breaking free of one set of chains means you're truly free. But you have no idea what you've really awakened. Little flame, what ancient bargains your defiance has set in motion. Kara smiled into the darkness, her hand moving unconsciously to the pendant that still hung warm against her throat.
Let it come, she said softly, her voice carrying on the night wind. I'm not the broken girl who was left to die in the snow anymore. I'm not the weapon everyone wanted to forge or the vessel meant to carry ancient evil.
The stars above seemed to pulse in rhythm with her words, and she felt the power that lived in her bones respond to her certainty. I'm Kira Blackthorn. I'm the woman who rewrote prophecy itself. And if the darkness wants to dance, her smile turned sharp, beautiful and absolutely fearless. I'll teach it some new steps.
In the distance, something howled. Not a wolf, but something older and hungrier. The sound echoed across dimensions, carrying with it the promise of battles yet to come, of darkness that would test every choice she'd made, every alliance she'd forged.
But it also carried something else. The sound of other voices joining that first howl, dozens of them.
Hundreds.
The voices of every wolf, witch, and were creature who had found sanctuary in her territory, who had chosen freedom over safety, who had decided to stand with the woman who had learned to write her own story.
The final confrontation was coming.
But for the first time in her life, Kira Blackthorn wasn't facing it alone.
The real war is just beginning.
And this time, the darkness has no idea what it's up against.